Congress. I just read in the paper over the weekend that the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee and the subcommittee trade chairman are going to go to Peru and convince the Peruvian legislature how they need to internally change their laws, even though Peru has now, for the second time, voted to accept a negotiated agreement with the amendments that we insisted just a few weeks ago be in there for environmental and labor standards. You know, what's the amazing thing about Peru and Colombia particularly is that last week on the House floor, we voted on the suspension calendar with 20 minutes of debate to continue to keep our markets totally open to them. This sounds so irrational that you can hardly explain it enough times to people because they always walk away scratching their heads. So what would the trade agreement do? The trade agreements would open their markets to us. Now, why would you possibly argue the other side of that? In a 20-minute vote, with almost every member of the House vote, oh, sure, we're glad to continue to have their markets open our markets open to their goods, but we are reluctant about entering into a trade agreement that would let us sell things to them. It just seems to me such bad economics, so bad for American workers, it's hard to believe that could be your argument. But we just did that, and we're going to struggle mightily, it appears, to pass the Colombian agreement, a country in South America that has made the greatest progress toward free markets and democracy and personal security in the last decade of any country in South America, and has tried to maintain the strongest ties during that period with our country. And apparently we're going to look for ways to deny them access to our American-made goods, because we just in the process we're almost certain now to give them again an extension of access to their goods. And you might be asking, well, why would the Colombians want that, or why would the Peruvians want that? Sounds like they've got a one-way deal. They do have a one-way trade agreement right now, but they'd like the security of knowing that this is a permanent relationship. And in return for that, they'd like more access to American products for their people without heavy tariffs that are preventing those products from going in now. So we're going to continue to work. The trade agenda, when we passed the CAFTA trade bill in the last Congress, I think it was we had 15 Democrats vote for CAFTA. Obviously, you're going to have a lot more Democrats than that join Chairman Rangel and others for these trade agreements to be successfully ratified. And they're not going to be ratified if every time these small countries step up and do what we ask them to do, you then say, well, that was good, but we now decide we need you to do one more thing, and then one more thing, and then one more thing, and it never happens. Do you have a quick follow-up?
Yes, on the CAFTA 15, would you need more than 15 Democrats simply because of the change in balance of the number?
Or change in balance of members, we need more than 15. But if you're going to be in the majority, you have some obligation to act like the majority. And if you're going to negotiate agreements with the administration, with the U.S. Trade Ambassador, with the Secretary of the Treasury, and announce those agreements, there's some obligation for those agreements then to be kept and move forward, in my view.
What I'm trying to get a sense of is if you're seeing very many Republicans who might vote against these agreements, other than the perhaps 30 or so who are compelled to oppose all trade agreements.
So I think there's no question that Republicans will provide a majority of the votes for any of these trade agreements, but we can't provide the kind of huge majorities, the irrational majorities, in terms of their lack of participation that we had come to with the last 2 or 3 trade votes in the last Congress. Anything else? The mic's in motion, so I
Sorry, over here behind the pole. My name's Mike O'Brien. I'm an intern at National Review. I'm working on a story about the prospects of picking the House back up in 2008. So my question is, you talk about the dismal mood of the American voters. There's not great enthusiasm for our presidential candidates yet. The NRCC trails the DCCC 5-1 in fundraising. Are your revolutionary ideas good enough? How are the prospects for recapturing the House, and why?
Well, I think they're good, Mike. And one of the reasons I think they're good is just the field of opportunity for Republicans is so great in the next election. There are 61 Democrats in the House from districts that President Bush carried twice. I'd almost guarantee you that our presidential candidate will carry all 61 of those districts. Half of those 61 Democrats are brand new to the House, and as I look back at the record that they ran on, or the comments that they ran on, what they said they do when they ran for election in 2006, they were basically running as Republicans who didn't like the involvement in Iraq and didn't like President Bush, and they're not voting like that, and so they're kind of defining themselves in a helpful way for us. Our presidential candidate early next year will begin to define the future of the party in a way that is clearly, as every transition is, creates a different momentum.